Renata and Tiago had been married for 5 years and had gone through many things during that time. Most of the problems of the young family had to do with their financial situation. At the same time, it couldn't be said that they were living very badly. The young couple worked tirelessly to buy their own house, but until they could gather the necessary amount, they had to live with Tiago's mother, Bruna. Bruna was a determined and strict woman who wanted to control every step of her young daughter-in-law. Of course, she wasn't as strict with her son and always paid more attention to him than to Renata. This was partly because, from Bruna's point of view, her son's wife wasn't a good match for him. Renata grew up in an orphanage and was deprived of parental affection from an early age. She didn't know what it was like to have a family that took care of each other. What can that orphan offer you? She didn't even know how normal relationships work. Bruna used to tell her son, to Tiago's credit, it's worth saying that he never blindly believed in his mother's opinion and always preferred to draw his own conclusions. In turn, Renata never confronted her mother-in-law because she understood that living under the same roof, as the woman didn't give her the right to establish her own rules. Saying that Bruna was a strange person would be a huge understatement. More than anything else, she loved to get involved in the affairs of the young family, checking their income and expenses, and giving them unsolicited advice on how to live their lives. Bruna knew perfectly well that her son wanted to have a child and didn't keep quiet about it. You'll never be happy with her, believe me, the woman would say. Tiago's father died of a heart attack 10 years ago, and since then, Tiago's mother became the closest person to him on earth. Tiago could withstand any outburst from his mother except criticism of his beloved wife. He liked Renata the moment he saw her and, therefore, didn't want to argue with his mother about the choice he made. The absence of children caused a lot of tension in the family, and Renata continued to receive hostile looks from her mother-in-law because of it. It's hard to say how the story would have unfolded if one day Renata hadn't discovered that she was pregnant. The news made Tiago the happiest man on earth. "Thank you, my dear," Tiago whispered, embracing his beloved wife. Of course, the young couple didn't see the look on Bruna's face at that moment. Deep down, the woman dreamed that her son would divorce Renata and find a new life partner. From Bruna's point of view, Renata simply couldn't bring anything but problems into her son's life. This wasn't true, of course, and Tiago knew better than anyone. According to the doctors, Renata was completely healthy and shouldn't have any problems getting pregnant and giving birth to a healthy baby. To Renata's surprise, the pregnancy wasn't that difficult. The morning sickness and dizziness that many pregnant women face weren't as bad in Renata's case. The only thing that poisoned her life was her mother-in-law's endless instructions, who wanted to control every step of hers and even monitored her nutrition. "You shouldn't be eating so much, dear, that could cause allergies in your baby," Bruna said, as if she really knew what she was talking about. Renata even tried to follow her mother-in-law's advice at first, but then gave up and started doing everything as the doctors and her own body recommended. "Why do you want to risk it? These aren't the kinds of mistakes you can fix later," Bruna said, pursing her lips disapprovingly. Tiago stoically endured the discussions between his wife and mother, usually choosing to simply ignore them. But then something happened that completely changed the situation. On that fateful morning, Renata was supposed to go to her monthly appointment with her obstetrician, and Tiago needed to finish his quarterly report and had to leave for work earlier than usual. So Renata decided to go home alone, as she wanted to get some fresh air. She decided not to take a taxi, since she was still in the early stages of pregnancy and could enjoy her walks. As she was about to leave the house, Renata heard her mother-in-law yelling angrily, "What do you think you're doing? Can't you wait a little so that Tiago can take you by car during his lunch break, or at least take a taxi? I don't think you should be walking around the city in your condition, Renata. You didn't say anything to your mother-in-law and simply left home towards the hospital." The hospital was just over half a kilometer away from their house, so walking there couldn't possibly harm the baby in any way. The weather was nice and Renata felt the warm rays of the sun on her face, as if a mother's hand was caressing her. Immersed in her own thoughts, the woman reached the crossing and, without thinking twice, crossed the street to get to the other side. For some reason, the young woman didn't really look around and imprudently trusted the drivers to stop in time and let her cross the street. Unfortunately, one of them was speeding. As expected, there wasn't enough time to reduce speed at the crossing. The screech of brakes and the shouts of other pedestrians echoed in Renata's ears. Fortunately, the impact wasn't strong enough to cause any real harm to Renata, but it was strong enough to knock the woman backwards. Renata's head spun when she felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Although someone called the ambulance immediately, Renata's health suffered irreparable damage. The woman didn't immediately realize this, but only after she returned to the local hospital's ICU. The first person Renata saw was the nurse on duty who was setting up the floor. "What happened to me? Why am I in the hospital?" Renata asked weakly. "You're okay, ma'am. Just some minor bruises. You'll be fine," the nurse said, looking into the young woman's eyes. Renata immediately realized she was lying. "And what about my baby? Is my baby okay?" the woman asked, becoming agitated. The nurse seemed very uncomfortable and tried to hide her eyes by reading the patient's chart. It was then that the nurse gave the sad news that she had lost the baby. "This can't be happening. Tell me it's not true." "No, I don't believe it." Renata was hysterical. But the worst was yet to come. Tiago and his mother arrived at the hospital, and while Tiago behaved as a loving and caring husband should, his mother was not so gracious and attacked Renata with accusations. "It's your fault you lost the baby. Didn't I tell you not to walk to the hospital? Couldn't you have waited for Tiago to take you there, or at least taken a taxi?" Tears streamed down Renata's face. What she least expected to hear at that moment were accusations. The truth was that the accident could have happened to anyone and in no way was it Renata's fault, but there was no changing Bruna's opinion. It seemed that the woman was literally trying to incinerate her daughter-in-law with her eyes, accusing her of every mortal sin. Caught between a rock and a hard place, Tiago felt very uncomfortable. On one hand, he was very sad for his wife, and on the other, he saw that his mother only wanted the best for him and his family. But Renata was the one who suffered the most from all this. The poor woman was devastated. Not a minute passed without her blaming herself for choosing to take that walk. She felt so guilty that at one point, she simply began to hate herself and her life. The worst part, however, was that the doctor said that after the accident, Renata would hardly be able to have children. As the woman's condition was unstable, the doctors decided to keep her in the hospital for a few more days. As expected of the loving and faithful husband, Tiago visited his wife every day, bringing flowers and fruits. Meanwhile, Bruna lamented the loss of her grandson. The woman was so shaken that her health began to deteriorate rapidly. One day, Tiago returned home and found his mother lying on the floor of the living room. Mrs. Bruna was having chest pains and breathing rapidly. "Mom, what happened?" "What's wrong?" exclaimed Tiago. He realized there was no time to lose and immediately called an ambulance. Fortunately, thanks to her son's quick reaction, Bruna survived. Now, Tiago had both his mother and his wife to visit in the same hospital. Bruna had complained of heart problems before, but after the events of the last few days, her health deteriorated significantly. According to her cardiologist, the woman needed to avoid any stress and anxiety. "You should probably hire a caregiver for her," the doctor added. By coincidence, Renata left the hospital a week before Bruna could go home. There are no words to describe how unpleasant their first encounter was. When Bruna finally arrived home, the situation did not improve over time. From then on, every day of Renata's life was filled with pain and accusations. Bruna and Renata had never been on good terms, but the situation worsened even more because Bruna could no longer take care of herself and needed Renata or Tiago's help for everything. While Tiago spent most of his time at work, his wife stayed at home, thus taking worse care of his sick mother-in-law. Renata couldn't help it. She felt guilty for losing the baby and for causing the lady's heart attack. Besides, not a day went by without Bruna reminding her daughter-in-law of the mistake she made. "If only you had listened to me, none of this would have happened," the woman repeated every day. At first, Renata simply remained silent, stoically enduring all the accusations, hoping her mother-in-law would eventually let it go. Unfortunately, that's not exactly how it happened. When Bruna improved a little, Renata finally could return to work. Now, at least, she didn't have to spend all her days in the unbearable company of her mother-in-law. But as soon as Renata returned from work, Bruna immediately brought up the subject again, launching all kinds of accusations and criticisms at her. Of course, poor Renata often talked to her husband about moving out of her mother's house and renting a place of their own, but her husband always countered with the question of who would take care of Bruna. "I'm sorry, dear, but we can't afford to hire a caregiver for her, and renting our own place would also cost too much. I simply don't earn enough," Tiago said, lowering his guilty eyes. Renata understood that there was a lot of truth in her husband's words and, therefore, didn't argue with him but accepted her fate with humility. 10 years had passed, during which time Bruna had become even more unbearable. As the woman was alone most of the time, she began to spend time with her neighbor and her son. She supported this friendship. Amanda was a local gossip who knew everything about everyone and shared this information with anyone remotely interested in it. Having quickly realized that Bruna didn't like her daughter-in-law, Amanda began to criticize the woman when Renata came home from work a little earlier than usual and inadvertently overheard a very strange conversation. Upon entering the living room, she realized that there was a lively conversation between two friends happening in the kitchen. "Do you know that Tiago picks up Vanessa at the bus stop every day on the way to work?" Amanda said. "So what?" "Of course, Vanessa is a beautiful woman, unlike my daughter-in-law," but what does that matter?" Bruna replied. At that moment, Renata turned pale, and a shiver ran down her spine. Meanwhile, Amanda continued, "Just think about it, what if they got together? Vanessa isn't married, she's beautiful. Tell Tiago to think about it, not to miss the chance, especially since your daughter-in-law probably will never be able to have children." A smile immediately appeared on Bruna's face. She definitely liked her friend's idea. Mrs. Bruna really liked Vanessa, whom Tiago had known since high school. Vanessa came from a rich and influential family. They could certainly help Tiago build a career. Everything Renata heard made her pale at first and then blush to the roots of her hair. There definitely was nothing between Tiago and Vanessa. Renata knew that, but her mother-in-law's words still hurt her deeply. She couldn't believe Bruna because while she was taking care of her, the old woman was discussing Renata behind her back and looking for someone to replace her. After that memorable conversation, Amanda always tried to leave her friend's house before her daughter-in-law came home from work. Unfortunately, these were by no means all the problems Renata would have to deal with. Few people knew that Amanda believed in all sorts of supernatural things and often consulted a psychic. It was Amanda who suggested that her friend seek out a medium named Rodrigo. "Go see for yourself, you'll understand everything when you talk to him. He'll tell you what's best for your son, whether to stay with Renata or start a new life with Vanessa," Amanda whispered to her friend. At first, Bruna was skeptical of this idea, but over time, Amanda managed to change her mind, and Bruna finally agreed to consult a medium. On that day, Rodrigo went to Bruna's house to conduct the initial consultation. The medium turned out to be a tall man with a penetrating gaze, who knew how to manipulate the will of his clients and was capable of hypnotizing them. Seeing Bruna as an old naive woman, Rodrigo began to fulfill his plan, skillfully manipulating her mind. The astute medium made the old woman believe that her daughter-in-law wanted to kill her. Furthermore, he told Bruna that, to prevent this, she needed to perform a special ritual to purify the house. Of course, all this cost a lot of money, which Bruna naively withdrew from her bank account. Meanwhile, the swindler went even further in his predictions and advice. At one point, the medium even turned the woman against her own son, whom she loved with all her heart. It wasn't difficult for the skillful manipulator to do this. One day, Renata accidentally witnessed the ritual invented by Rodrigo. Upon seeing Renata, the medium pointed his finger at her and said, "Here she is, the reason for all your problems." Obviously, this wasn't true, but Rodrigo was great at reading his clients and therefore always tried to say exactly what they wanted to hear. Of course, Renata tried to tell her mother-in-law that she was being deceived, but Bruna was already under Rodrigo's influence and didn't want to listen to anyone else. He was like a vampire, slowly sucking the savings and life out of his victim. It's hard to say how this story would have ended if Renata hadn't told her husband about the medium. Tiago didn't believe in any of that magical nonsense. Tiago and Renata took time off from work to return home early. Tiago immediately said, get out of here, or I'll call the police." But it wasn't so easy to get rid of Rodrigo. He already tasted the money and wasn't about to lose such a good client. Trying to get the medium out of the house, Tiago grabbed him by the hand, at the same time feeling a sharp pain in the lower abdomen. Tiago looked at Rodrigo and saw that he was holding a small knife in his hand, which he quickly hid in the robe sleeve. Fortunately, Renata reacted in time and immediately called the police. Soon, the unfortunate medium was detained and interrogated, and it was found that he had many victims who spent their last money to pay for the swindler's services. Fortunately, Rodrigo didn't cause any significant harm to Tiago, as the knife only injured soft tissues without affecting any vital organs. Tiago was discharged from the hospital a week later. Now, all he remembered from that horrible situation was a thin scar on his abdomen. When the man returned home, the first thing Bruna did was apologize to her son. It was only then that Mrs. Bruna realized how terrible it had been and that her son and daughter-in-law only wanted the best for her. This story could have ended there, but it didn't. About a month after Rodrigo was arrested, Renata found out she was pregnant. According to the ultrasound, Renata and Tiago were expecting twins. This time, the woman had no trouble carrying the pregnancy to term and, 9 months later, gave birth to 2 healthy babies. Now, Bruna was happy to be able to help take care of her grandchildren all day and enjoyed being a grandmother at last. In the end, each of the heroes of this incredible story got everything they wanted, and all we can do is be happy for them and wish them all the best. If you enjoyed this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. A big hug and see you soon.